Agreed. It is a very hard thing to get a hegemon to stop seeing yourself as a hegemon. But it there's an argument that is being made by some on Twitter. Um, and he's effectively arguing. There's one particular person. He has a very big account. He gets a lot of pushback when he makes this argument, but I'm going to present this argument to get your take on it. That the United States does see China as a peer. That regardless of all the hyperbolic language, regardless of all of the threats and all this other stuff, that Donald Trump has to sell it. It's kind of like with the United States and Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. has no cards. Everything that the U.S. has been doing, oh, maybe I'll give tomahawks. Maybe I'll give this. Maybe I'll give that. Let's go after the energy sector. All of these things are trying to get leverage. It's a lust for leverage that they don't have. If you had it, you would have used it and exerted it by now in order to try to compel the Russians. I'm saying the same thing is true for China in this case, that the U.S. may already see him as, let's say, a peer, but Trump, for reasons of media, for reasons of his own ego, would never say it. Like, meaning Trump would never say that he has to be on even keel with the Russians in Ukraine. In the same way that he can't bring himself to say that we're on an even keel with China in regards to these kind of peer nations. That it doesn't mean that we're not going to compete. It doesn't mean that he's going to be hyperbolic and all that stuff. But how do you see it? I mean, does China believe that the U.S. sees them as a peer, regardless of what the language comes out of the U.S.? Or you don't think it's that way? You think the U.S. is still in this mindset of we must destroy and hobble and prevent China from the horse getting out of the barn?
Well, there's a famous economist who's friends with Jeffrey Sachs, a friend of mine, and John Mearsheimer believes in, like you mentioned, hegemony. He believes that the U.S. and Western conception of whoever gains power in this world wants to be a hegemon is the way that the world works. And when we look, I think he's wrong. I mean, and actually Jeff Sachs also thinks he's wrong. China does not want to be a hegemon. China wants to have wealthy people and do business and be open for business and trade with other countries and take care of itself and also grow its peers in the rest of the world. It doesn't have alliances with any country. But I think John Mearsheimer is a very intelligent man, but he's wrong about the way that people think in Asia and the way that they think in China specifically isn't that way. There were a couple of centuries where China was the most powerful country in all of Asia, and it actually withdrew and basically closed its borders to the other countries. It was not interested in dominating Japan and Korea and Thailand. And those countries wanted to do trade with China, and China was like, we're too busy with our own stuff. So China doesn't actually have that mentality of wanting to rule the world. So I think that is a misconception. However, I'm going back to your point about Donald Trump. I think you're right to a degree, but we have to look at what's not the same in the way that China treats the United States and the way the United States treats China. China has not surrounded the United States with like 50 military bases.
Exactly.
But the United States has. China does not fly sorties of spy planes up and down the coast of the United States. But the United States does that on a daily basis to China. China does not send its cruisers up the coast of the United States frequently, but the United States does. China does not arm Hawaii so that it can vie for independence, but the United States does arm Taiwan. So the United States is directly poking China in the eye all the time on all kinds of red line issues that really matter to the national security to the people of China. And China is not reciprocating that behavior. Yes, it's engaged in trade tit for tat, but it is not engaged in a military tit for tat. China has an enormous, very powerful military, but I assure you, it's really for national defense. China hasn't been in a war since 1979, 45 years ago, and it was in that war for 1 month. And the United States, as we know, and I'm sure most of your viewers know, is constantly at war. I think in our entire history, there have been 12 years of peace. I mean, the United States is the definition of an imperial actor who does obviously want hegemon, and China clearly, just from looking at the facts, is not. So I think, yeah, Trump, does say, he has, maybe there is some openness to peace. Maybe it's the art of the deal where he wants to go to Beijing and finally settle on a deal and find some way to coexist with China. But the way that the United States, not just Donald Trump, because the United States is not just the president, the way
Correct.
U.S. military behavior and the State Department treat China is adversarial.
It is. I mean, I am not one of those people that believe that the U.S. is giving up hegemony. I just don't buy it. I think you may drag that horse to water because they're forced. Like, meaning, if you and I have a similar chess rating, then I can't dominate you. Even though if we're playing blitz for like 20, 30 games, I'm damn sure going to try. It's kind of like that, right? The U.S. is just bumped into something that it just can't push past in the typical way that it does, but it's going to give the bluster and everything else. No, I agree with you entirely. The Wall Street Journal's piece, what do you say, a rumor? So let's call it a rumor. What did China want out of that? I'm curious.
I briefly looked over. One of the things that they wanted was to change the wording about the U.S. relationship with Taiwan, which was we oppose, instead of we recognize that Taiwan is part of China and that there is one China, which is the current wording. They want the United States to say we oppose independence for for Taiwan or Taiwan province. But it was there are things that China considers a red line. Now, you
Right.
often hear from people who want to frame China as an aggressor that China is preparing for war and that China is preparing to take Taiwan back. And this is actually true to an extent. It is preparing for war and preparing to invade Taiwan in the event of US intervention or in the event of Japanese intervention. If a foreign power intervenes in the internal affairs of China, then China will react. But the plan right now is not military. That is a backup plan. The plan is to coax Taiwan people into realizing that the mainland's economy is more powerful, that they have a lot to gain from rejoining, I don't know what you would call it, Greater China. So that is the ideal. And I think that may actually be achievable in the next 5 to 10 years. I know some Chinese people who think it might theoretically happen faster than that. But the concept in the West where they frame China as an aggressor or as a hegemon by quoting Xi Jinping saying we need to prepare for war, that is one of those we need to prepare for war so we can assure peace kinds of we need to prepare for war.
Right. Well, it's wild. I mean, because you pointed out that our media is trash. Our media is trash. If you see, if somebody, let's say, slaps your wife and you get into a fight with that guy and they get you on camera, and the media in the U.S. reports, look at Jason Smith just beating a guy up for no reason. And people say, wow, that's amazing that he wilded out and just punched somebody like that. That's unfortunate. He shouldn't have been able to do that. Now, the moment that you pull back on it and say, well, the guy did slap his wife and say very bad things. He's responding to something. That's the way our media reports a lot of stuff. So they would say Kim Jong-un is firing missiles into the Sea of Japan, ignoring the fact that the U.S. is pretending as if they're trying to invade North Korea in these kind of military exercises, meaning they leave that stuff out. So they leave out the fact that the U.S. has military in Taiwan, that the U.S. has been this kind of salami slicing, this idea of Taiwan independence and blowing off the communiques. They leave that part out, which is the only reason they could say, well, China may militarily attack Taiwan. And again, missing that the U.S. has 800 military bases around the world. I've often asked this question, how does a country that plays Go deal with a country that plays chess? When you mention that part of the deal is, well, we need you to change the language in the communiques. And I'm like, are you serious? It's a communique. Like, we didn't care about the other one. Why would we care about a new language change? like China, do they get that? Because sometimes I don't think other countries around the world get that. When I see Iran, for example, and I think to myself, certainly you guys know we're sociopaths. What are you doing? And because they would try to make a deal and then they get hit in the middle of trying to make the deal, or the Hamas thing with Qatar, and they get hit in the middle of them trying to make a deal with Qatar. And I'm like, I don't think foreign countries fully get how psychopathic many of these world leaders are, it doesn't matter if they, okay, we'll change the language. Do they really think that that's going to affect U.S. policy regarding Taiwan?
Well, I think they're hopeful. I think there's an enormous amount of hope that there can be rational thinking in Washington, D.C. Um, and going back to your point from earlier about rare earth minerals in the United States and munitions,
Yeah.
maybe I think if anything can bring the United States to its senses, it's something like that. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the United States' ability to just replace China's complete supply chain overnight. It's not going to happen. So I really think that this is going to be one of those things that forces Donald Trump and Marco Rubio to come to the table with some kind of meaningful plan. And that's going to hopefully keep the peace, at least for now, at least for a generation. I'm hoping, really, because if some kind of deal can be made where the United States feels that it's able to continue, because semiconductors are made with rare earth materials. So if other countries can't get rare earth materials from China, then they can't make smartphones outside of China anymore. I mean, that's insane. So I think the United States will be forced to sit down and make some kind of deal. The next year is going to be very interesting because the United States needs China, and China has already proven that it doesn't actually need the United States as much. Exports only account for 12% of China's economy. And
that's like one city, I heard.
Yeah, and the United States comprises an actual minority of that, because ASEAN, which is the Southeast Asian nations, they actually are the primary trade partner with China. And China has increased, as we've talked about before, exports to countries around the world, including Africa, South America, Europe, Middle East, because of the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's basically replaced the United States' consumption of Chinese products to an equal degree to which the United States was consuming those. And China's economy is going to grow at least by 4.8%, according to the World Bank, a report that came out very recently. And that actually they upgraded from 4%. I'm still optimistic China's economy and GDP growth will be 5%, which is what China wanted before the trade war happened. That was their goal. And then the trade war happened. China's going to still make its goal, but the United States is floundering. And there's a lot of things that the United States needs from China. And China has already kind of proven that the tariffs didn't affect it nearly as much as the United States is clearly affected by and will be affected by. I was talking to an economist really fast, Dr. Yan Liang from Willamette University in Oregon this morning in Beijing. I guess it was last night for her. And she was explaining that the U.S. GDP is barely growing, and like just like you mentioned, without AI, and that China's ability to grow its economy at roughly the same goal that it was setting is basically proven that China, while it wants to do trade with the United States, China absolutely wants to trade with the United States. It doesn't need trade with the United States.
Mm-hmm. I think people need to realize this is a checkmate. And what I mean by this is, part of the U.S. strategy was we need to keep China in the barn. So there's that. Well, that horse is out the barn. The other part of it, for China's standpoint, was we need time. That if we can have enough time, and give me your take on this, because I could be wrong. If we have enough time, then just the very scale of our economy, the scale of our industrial sector, the U.S. cannot compete in that sense. Meaning, you're not going to challenge us militarily when it becomes clear that you would just obviously lose. And if we have 5 years, 10 years, then the ability for us to build ships, boats, bombs, missiles, etc., makes it that much more clear in that sense. Well, any deal that the United States strikes with China, especially with the constraints and the choke points that have been enacted just in this provision by itself, easily gives China that time frame if they want that time horizon. The U.S., as you point out, can't build the stuff. They don't have the refineries. May be able to get from Europe, but it will take Europe a decade or more for them to even build up their capabilities to doing this. Meaning, the time that China wanted, it has. Am I thinking about this right? Or tell me if I'm getting this wrong.
I think you're completely right. I think China has played the long game. There used to be a phrase, I think it came from Deng Xiaoping, that basically, if you were to hide our power and lay low. And I think that it did that for a very long time, for 40 years. And it was only in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years that China has really said, you know what? We're actually really powerful. And now the world is just starting to notice in the last couple of years, really. I mean, besides statesmen and people who have been studying China, the people of the world are really starting to look at Chinese infrastructure and say, wow, we don't have that. I mean, just look at the new Canyon Bridge in Guizhou. It's the tallest bridge in the world. I mean, the United States used to be the one building the biggest, the tallest, and the most amazing infrastructure in the world. And now China is opening a new amazing piece of infrastructure almost every single day, just because China's population is so large and they can actually absorb that kind of infrastructure, and the people need and use it. And it's, in a lot of cases, it's actually transferring wealth from urban areas to rural areas. There's so many things, textured and layered things that they're doing by each one of these projects. That bridge does not just serve as a bridge and a new highway. It is actually attracting wealth to a very poor part of China. So they're building up their, local wealth from urban people like myself who are absolutely going to go visit that bridge in their lifetime. It's just like the Golden Gate to some extent. I mean, a lot of people go to San Francisco just to see that. And that is an amazing way that San Francisco has increased its wealth over the years. I mean, it's an amazingly beautiful city. But I mean, China builds infrastructure and little villages to do that, to create wealth where it wasn't before. China is so well planned. And I think this is something the United States really misses. The United States is like, oh, let's have the invisible hand do everything, right? Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but China is actually making 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans that go as far as I know, 2049 is one of the plans that they have. And so all these plans within plans that are passed up and down the government, low levels, little villages, big cities. So the United States wants to say, haha, we're going to put a bunch of tariffs on you because you need us to import your goods. China is going to turn around and just make a plan to get around that. And it's going to follow that plan until that plan succeeds.
There was a question about, the gentleman Mina Uncensored. China has such a hands-off policy to a lot of stuff that takes place in a foreign policy sense that, like, for example, the many of these little fires that seems to be taking place around China, for example. So India and Pakistan gets into it. Nepal has a quote unquote revolution, if you want to call it that. Cambodia and Indonesia get into, was it Indonesia? I think it was Indonesia. Cambodia and Indonesia get into a fight.
Cambodia and Thailand.
Thailand, right.
Yeah.
I'm in Indonesia. This seems very coincidental, especially considering that China's strategy of dealing with, let's say, choke points in regards to the ocean, because that was part of the US strategy also. Well, we can create choke points in various parts of the globe for China's. They need to get their goods from point A to point B over the ocean. If we can find certain areas where we can create choke points, we can choke off Chinese industry, et cetera. And China says, okay, well, let's do the Belt and Road. Let's do the stuff over land. Let's make this railroad to Iran. And then it seems like the counterstroke to that is effectively a huge amount of money coming out of like USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, all of these NGOs that just so happen to create fires in the areas that China would need to be able to send their goods through. Do you see it in those terms? Like, do you think it's more of a coincidence that these places are going up in flames, or do you think it's more of a playbook being played?
You and I are of the same mind. I completely agree. I actually wrote newspaper articles for Nepal News about Belt and Road projects that they were building and how China wanted to connect to Nepal. And actually, China's goal is not just to connect to Nepal, but to connect India to Nepal as well. So China's already building the infrastructure on its side, and it's already given money, in some cases free, some grants, to build roads for Nepal to be better connected to China. So when Nepal went down, there were a lot of people debating what happened online. It got really heated between a lot of really big friends in the China community. But I am definitely 100,000% with Brian Berlitic and Nuri Vitachi, the journalist in Hong Kong, on this. It is very clear that the United States makes the declaration that we're going to back away from Asia and focus on our domestic issues. And watching ICE in the United States, it kind of looks like the United States is going to war with itself. But at the same time, nothing changed. I think, in fact, the whole we're shutting down USAID thing was just cover for them to reorganize how the State Department was interfering in the foreign affairs of other countries, because
Yes.
noted NED people are now in the government in Nepal and other countries around China. Fortunately, what you're talking about, Nepal was going to be a new project to connect India and China and connect Nepal through land ports to China to increase the wealth of Nepalese people. And so it's bad for them. I feel sorry for them. However, the connection that China has with most of the rest of the world island runs through Kazakhstan. So that's
Mhm.
safe, at least for now. So I would be watching Kazakhstan if I was a betting man, because that is the way that China is connected to the rest of the world, really. In case the United States were to shut off its ability to ship over sea by around Singapore and so forth. But absolutely, it looks like the United States is going cutthroat to try to contain China with pro-US governments around China that are set up to be operated covertly out of Washington, D.C. And I think that a lot of research that has gone into that. And I think Brian Berlitic is doing incredible work. For anyone who wants to know more about it, they should
Yes.
look into him, because he's covered it, and Nuri Vitachi too, really in a lot of depth.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's actually kind of frightening how much the United States is obsessing with China by going after China's neighbors.
That's kind of my point about any kind of deal with the US. Like that's precisely my point. Like, how does China deal with that? Like, because I see it's making counter move from the standpoint of, okay, because it's always weird to me, right? People write policy papers. And it's not like these are hidden secret documents. These documents are there for anybody to read. So you could be in China and be like, all right, well, they're doing this, this, and this. How do we counter that? And obviously there are going to be some secret stuff, but for all intents and purposes, we are following a playbook of trying to maintain primacy. And at the very least, to try to make life miserable for China and its neighbors as it pursues its objectives of its own growth and stability. How does China deal with that? I mean, is it just from its point of view, well, we just continue to grow, we continue to make friends with these places, we continue to trade? Or does it take, I don't know, some other action in this regard? Because it seems to be very restrained, very benign in the way that it engages.
You're absolutely right. I actually kind of find it frustrating sometimes, but I have to sit back and try to accept the fact that I'm a guest in China and that I'm not going to be going and like saying, you know what, you guys should be doing something. But
Right.
what
Right.
really happens is China has this policy, a very firm policy of non-intervention in the affairs of foreign countries. And it
Yeah.
takes that so seriously that it's to the point that it's frustrating, because China is like, oh, you have a new government, we'll trade with the new government. And this goes back to something Carl Cha, I think you may have had him on before, has
He's
said, and that
fantastic.
is,
Yeah.
China is open for business. So if you have a new government, great, let's trade. And so, we see this in Israeli Gaza. We see this because China has condemned Israel again and again and again and votes against everything that Israel's doing. But at the same time, China and Israel are still trading. And China is also sending aid to Gaza at the same time, because China does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. And so this is really frustrating for a lot of people. And you look at Nepal. As soon as the new government came in, China's government was like, we're eager to engage with the new government and open diplomatic relations on a peer-to-peer basis. This, I think it's actually the bold move. China understands that it's playing the long game, that it is demonstrating peace. It's not just saying we are for peace. It's actually showing what peace looks like, because it is not like the United States sanctioning countries all over the world. It doesn't do that. It does sanction individuals for various reasons, but not whole states. And it doesn't engage militarily with states. And even sometimes when it runs counter to the benefit of China. Instead, it says, oh, you have a new government, we're open for business, let's engage in diplomatic ties. I mean, it's like that pacifist friend of ours that we would ask, oh, well, what if someone hits you? And in China's case, it would only come to blows if someone actually hit China directly. So, like, I think, I don't think the United States should be very careful, because there is a red line. And if the United States were to actually militarily engage with China in some way, there would be a retaliation. But as
Yeah.
long as it's going on in these covert ways in other nations, I think China, for the most part, is just going to say, welcome to the new government. We're open for business. Do you want to trade? We're going to send our ambassador when you're ready.
But isn't that potato? I mean, what I mean by that is the limits on graphene, lithium, rare earths, etc. China may not say it directly, but everybody and their mama knows that part of the reason they're doing that is to put a constraint on the US's capability to wage war against China, or at the very
Absolutely.
least, like so. But isn't that a sanction by another term, or at the very least not a tariff, but a sanction by another term? We're creating choke points in the way that you're able to operate. I'm not saying it's negative. I would agree. In fact, I would probably go further if I was China. but that's besides the point. I'm not saying to disagree. I'm pointing out that they do engage in it, even if they call it something else. And
well, I mean, what I primarily meant was not militarily or in a covert way to overthrow a government, for example.
Okay. And I wouldn't want them to. They would lose credibility if they even did try to do something like that. Agreed. Yeah, I guess my concern is that you get a situation where governments flip. And those, like for example, Argentina, really good example. Milei gets into Argentina. Argentina was supposed to be a member of BRICS. They immediately pull out of any notion of BRICS. Now China may stand like Jesus, waiting for people to come back. And when Milei gets out, Argentina may go back to BRICS. And so in your case, your point being the long term would play out in that. But I guess my thought is trade is possible when countries are not at war and not at conflict. And if sometimes chaos is the entire point of the process, like for example, in Nepal, does Nepal still, I can't get it out. Will they still go through with the Belt and Road Initiative with the new government that's in play?
Well, currently they're a member of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, Nepal has paused some of the projects. In fact, it has paused some of the projects, but a lot of the projects that have been built are there, and they're going to continue to help Nepal anyway. I think part of China's thinking is, if you look at the underdeveloped world, it has been underdeveloped. It didn't just start that way. At some point, Europe was relatively underdeveloped and Africa was relatively underdeveloped. And then Europe came and took wealth from Africa and India and elsewhere and became developed. And then these other places became poorer. I mean, it's obvious because there was a transfer of wealth and it was at the point of a bayonet and sword.
Yes.
And so Europe took all of that wealth. I think China sees that by developing the underdeveloped world, it is creating the conditions for a more peaceful world, and it is playing a bigger long game than the United States is really understanding or really seeing. China wants to rebuild the world in a new way where it is incapable. It is not possible for some countries to take advantage of others because there's a degree of economic autonomy. Look at solar exports, for example. The Treasury Secretary of the United States, the former Yellen, basically was screaming over capacity for the last couple of months before she was removed from her role. And it's not just that China wants to build the most amazing energy infrastructure domestically that is possible. No, there's another play here. China is trying to help the underdeveloped world develop energy autonomy so it is no longer reliant on fossil fuel imports, not just to help the environment, but to take power away from countries that benefit from such an arrangement, if you understand what I mean.
Yes. Yes, I do understand what you mean by that. Basically, in helping, let's say, the underdeveloped world develop, you are allowing them more autonomy. You're making friends, so there's that, right? They usually appreciate if you build a hospital in their country. But B, you're allowing them to be more autonomous, so there's less control that can be exerted by other countries in those countries. No, I do get it. As you point out, it's a long game, as opposed to this just kind of direct action in the way that the U.S. does. Also, and I guess to speak to the last point, there's another argument that's being made also implicitly by China in this. Basically, we believe in a global world. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in sovereignty of nations. Like, that is an argument that seems to come out of their behavior throughout the world. So no, well, we're not going to intervene militarily in this country because the country has a sovereign right to exist. Even if we know that somebody else is pushing and creating issues, we are not going to engage. We're not going to get involved. We believe in rule of law. We believe in sovereignty. What do these other people that are overthrowing the government, what do they believe in? It's almost like a sales pitch to the rest of the world on some level.
I would like to add one thing, because I think my answer was incomplete now that I'm hearing you articulate it back so eloquently. You know, China also does believe in the rule of law of the United Nations and the Security Council. Right. That's why it abides by the all of the vetoes of the United States, sadly. But another aspect of that is that China does participate in peacekeeping missions, which are often put in sovereign nations against those nations' will. So China is willing to engage with the United Nations in peacekeeping missions so long as the law of the United Nations is followed to the letter of the law. But again, those forces, as we both know, don't actually engage in combat unless they are directly fired on. So they're mostly, no offense to those people who work so hard to try to create peace, not really particularly useful.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair distinction. I mean, I was thinking more unilateral going into a country.
Right.
No, that argument is a damn good argument. I mean, in the old days, the U.S. could make this argument that we are freedom, democracy, you should come with us as opposed to the Soviet Union. And these days, that argument has just been tossed. This is just naked hegemony at this point. Jason, fantastic breakdown, man. Really good breakdown.
Thank you, sir.
I really appreciate you joining me on this. I really appreciate you explaining this. Great work. Absolutely great work. Jason Smith, he's a journalist, author, radio show host, podcaster, and media commentator. His latest book is entitled The World Without Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future. By the way, where can people find you, just so people would know?
It's on Amazon. So you just search in Amazon using the name that you just gave, and the book will pop right up.
But you have a podcast, a YouTube show, and a radio show.
Yeah, I have a couple of radio shows now. I've just given some extra work today.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, fair enough. Where can people find you on YouTube?
The Bridge to China is the name of the show. I think that's also the handle now. I think we were able to successfully change it. You can find us on podcast, Spotify, Apple China, Apple USA, and basically any podcasting platform, whatever you guys like. We're on there, The Bridge to China. We produce at least 2 episodes every single week. If you're in some countries, Laos, Cambodia, Pakistan, Beijing, you can find us on the air.
Badass, man. Badass. Congratulations on the new radio show, by the way. Jason, you have a really good night. Thank you for this.
You too, sir.
Bye-bye. All right. Great breakdown with